Hello, my name is Ryan Freeman. Welcome to my life and welcome to the park. Today I will start a new story series. This is going to trek across my life starting at the very beginning. Whenever someone tells their story, you might ask, why are they doing it? What is the purpose? Perhaps I have asked this question and I just want to share it with you. This is a bit of a confession. I want to just talk about my life, not only the good parts, not only the bad parts. I want to talk about it all. In some ways, it's a therapeutic measure because it helps me untangle the knots within my soul. Some parts of my life I haven't talked about with anyone, so perhaps just sharing it on this camera and with anyone in YouTube that actually is interested in this, it will do me some good. And also just because I want to. I want to talk about my life, and I don't know why. I just want to get this story out. I do not know how many years I have left on this earth, and right now I have the time and the will, so I'm going to tell this story as honestly as possible. I am not going to try to cast anything in a better or a worse light. I just want to share it. I love life, and I'm very thankful for my life. I haven't always been. I have had ups and downs, as everyone does. Whether you live in a palace or you live in the slums, we all go through human ups and downs. And I believe that if anyone tells their story truthfully and honestly, then we can all relate with one another. So this is my story. Judge it as you will. I'm sure that other people that are the characters within this story that I will talk about might have their own opinion, their own perspective. We all live on this earth with our own eyes and our own temperament, and we perceive the light of the sun from the sun as it shines on everything in our life differently than other people. Some people see more colors than others. Some people see more evil or more good. Some people are idealistic. Some people are realistic. So without boring you further, this is my perspective. Take it as you will. All right. So to begin with, I was born 38 years ago, February 15, 1982, in Whittier, California. That is a historical suburb of Southern California. I was born to James Freeman and his wife, Dana Freeman. My dad, James, was 25 years old. He had already had his first son 2.5 years before, my older brother, Nathan Freeman. So I'm going to talk about my parents, perhaps, because, my story begins with them. My dad, James, is a complicated individual. He's very secretive and very open at the same time. And he's had a very big impact on my life, as you shall find out if you follow this story. So to begin with, he was born in sort of a very chaotic household. He was one of the poorest families in a city called Pico Rivera. It was sort of a rougher area than where my mother was from. My mother was, her family moved around, but when they met, she was in Whittier. She had a sort of a nicer middle-class life. She had a father who was the pastor of a church, a Baptist church. So she was a pastor's kid. Anyone in the church knows what that's like. Her mother was a preacher's wife. They went to church every Sunday. They were in church all the time. Church, Christianity dominated my mother's family's life. And they were good Christians, good American Christians, as you could imagine, which perhaps is a negative or a positive connotation for you, dependent upon your interactions with evangelicals. But they were your typical evangelicals. My grandfather and grandmother, they loved Billy Graham. They loved Reagan, a very Republican family. Although not very into politics. In fact, I would say they were more wrapped up in church life, in their little community. he had bounced around to various churches in his life. I'm not going to go into his past. I'm talking about my mother's father. But at the point where my mother meets my father, he was pastor of a small Baptist church in Pico Rivera, congregation of about 100, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, depending upon the year. He was there for decades. And it was at that church that my mother met my father. My father lived in Pico Rivera, where the church was, and I don't know all of the details on who invited him to church or whatnot, but he was a teenager. I think he was probably 16. My mother was 14, around that age. In the youth group. If you've ever grown up in a church, youth group is it's a wonderful way to make friends. I am not going to try to proselytize you about religion. I'm only talking about religion because it was a huge part of my early story. So I'll make that the last disclaimer for today. So youth group is a way that people meet friends, they make lovers as well. And my mother and father fell in love. I believe perhaps my father's older brother and my mother's older sister had actually dated and introduced them together. And while my aunt and uncle did not stay together, my father and mother did. And they formed a family. And they had my brother Nathan. My mother was 20 years old, 18, 19 when she got married. She was 20 years old when she had my older brother Nathan. My dad was 23. Then he was 25 when he had me. And just to give a little more background on my father's family, while my mother's family was very conservative and sort of upright members of the establishment, very concerned about social appearances, appearing to be good Americans, good taxpayers, not communists, at that time, during the Cold War when all of that was going on. Clean shaved and all of that. My dad's family was very different. My dad's father was the youngest of 13 kids, I believe, from Alabama. He rode the rails as a hobo out to California, as far as I understand, as far as the story has come to me. And he married my grandmother, Alice, who was a Spanish woman, or her mother was Spanish. And I don't know their history and all of that, but they had this poor family in Pico Rivera, very unorthodox compared to my mother's family. They were loud and crude. My grandfather was a truck driver with a big Confederate flag and big horns. And I remember my father telling me that the truck drivers went on strike all over California. I don't remember when, maybe it was the 60s or the 70s or something like that. And my grandfather, while my mom's dad was such an upright guy that he wouldn't hurt a fly, like he was always trying to be, the Baptist preacher. My dad's dad, he was the type of guy who got into fights. He beat up his wife's former husband anytime he came around. He was a tough Southern boy, Confederate rebel Southern boy, who would make homemade hooch in his bathtub, moonshine, have wild parties. And when the truck drivers went on strike, him and his friends would go out to the desert with rifles and shoot at the scabs. Probably to scare them, probably not to murder them. I don't know. So two very different grandfathers. One who was very Christian, very nonviolent, very pro-social. One who was maybe a little antisocial. and very proud of his Southern heritage, and would always say, if the South won the war, we would have been rich. You know, his family, they were Klan members. They were not pro-social people. Very different from my mom's side. And I had heard, actually, my dad's dad didn't live long. He died when I was about 8, so I don't have so many memories of him. My memories of him were always him salting his Budweiser while watching the Dodger game. He had sort of calmed down. But my mom's dad, I grew up with him. He was an amazing grandfather. As amazing as an American citizen and patriot and shepherd of his flock, of his church. He told me once that actually he had many conversations with my dad's dad, so my two grandfathers would sometimes talk. In my mother's father, the preacher, in his church office, they would sit together and talk about life. And I remember my mom's dad, R, I call him R, he asked my dad's dad, Jack, R asked Jack, what do you think about God? What's your religion? Because Jack didn't go to church. And Jack would tap his ring. He was a Mason, you know, this Confederate, proud to have family in the Klan, wished the South won the war. He was also a Mason to boot. Mysterious guy, making homemade hooch in his in his bathtub, shooting at the scabs who crossed the picket, or who crossed the strike lines. And he was a Mason to boot, and very proud of that. So I don't. This is my family, man. You don't pick your family members. I have one side that was just very upright. No one broke the law. In fact, my grandfather was the president of the HOA where he lived. He organized it. He wrote letters. He was studious. He had a PhD. My dad's dad was the opposite. He was a brawler. He made homemade hooch. Shot at the people who he didn't agree with. Was proud to be a Confederate. So very different families where my mom and my dad came together and fell in love. And I think perhaps that's the beautiful thing about love. If you read the stories or listen to the songs and the lyrics, love transcends class, love transcends race, love transcends religion. The great love stories, I believe, all express that. And so even though my dad and mom came from two very different ways of life and cultures, they loved each other enough to fall in love as teenagers, to get married, and to start a family. And yeah, so I think I'll probably end this episode there. And in the next episode, I will continue the story. So, like I said, this is going to be a long series. I'm not doing this for any other purpose that I don't know why. I first had this idea, so I wanted to talk about some of my backpacking stories. But then I thought, I can't, to explain how I got into backpacking, I would need to tell my story about religion. Well, I can't tell my story about religion if I don't tell my story about my family. And so I think in that sort of way, the stories that I sort of wanted to tell, which happened in my 20s, I realized I had to go all the way back. And so that sort of spawned in me an urge to even just tell my origin stories. And it's a nice thing to go back through your life and shed light on all of the various parts. And actually, I believe that it does us a lot of good, even though we might summon up some bad feelings, or painful feelings, I should say, not bad feelings. I don't believe any feelings are really bad. I believe some are painful, but I believe that when you talk about painful things, or things that may not be easy to talk about with other people, that you do have a lot of healing. I think that's the whole point of therapy, right? Is that you're able to talk freely. So this is maybe in a way sort of my therapy. But also I believe that there are people who will benefit from hearing another person's life if they can relate to them. I know that I have. I wouldn't have the courage to tell my story if others didn't. And so with that being said, I will see you on the next episode, which might actually start in just a moment.